You never really know who you're sitting next to on a bus or who's watching you from the back of a nearly empty train car. Public transport is supposed to be a safe, routine part of daily life, a place where strangers coexist in silence, each lost in their own world. But sometimes the thin line between ordinary and terrifying blurs, and you find yourself in a situation you'll never forget. Tonight, I'm sharing 4 of the creepiest things that have ever happened to people on public transport. These aren't urban legends or stories passed around on Reddit for cheap thrills. These are real experiences, sent in by people who never expected their commute to turn into a nightmare. Let's start with a story that happened to a college student named Jamie. She was used to taking the late-night bus home from her campus library. Headphones in, hoodie up, just another face in the crowd. But one night, the bus was emptier than usual. Just Jamie, the driver, and a man sitting 3 rows behind her. She noticed him as soon as she got on. He was staring out the window, but every so often she'd catch his reflection in the glass, eyes flicking toward her. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was just being paranoid. But as the bus rolled through the city, stopping at fewer and fewer stops, she realized he hadn't moved. Not once. Not even when the bus jerked to a stop or when people got on and off. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. Jamie's stop was coming up and she started to gather her things. That's when she noticed the man stand up, almost in sync with her. She hesitated, pretending to check her phone, hoping he'd sit back down. He didn't. Instead, he moved closer, taking a seat just 1 row behind her. The bus was nearly empty now, and the driver was focused on the road. Jamie's heart pounded as she pressed the stop button, signaling her stop. The bus slowed and she stood up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. The man stood up too, following her down the aisle. She stepped off the bus, feeling the cold night air hit her face. The man stepped off right behind her. Jamie's street was quiet, lined with trees and dim streetlights. She started walking quickly, glancing over her shoulder. The man was following, matching her pace. She tried to stay calm, telling herself he might just live nearby. But when she turned down her street, he turned too. That's when she broke into a run, sprinting toward her house. She could hear his footsteps pounding behind her, getting closer. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking, and managed to unlock the door just as he reached the end of her driveway. She slammed the door shut, locked it, and peered through the peephole. The man stood there for a moment, staring at her door, before turning and disappearing into the night. Jamie never saw him again, but for weeks after, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She changed her routine, started taking different buses, and always made sure someone knew when she was coming home. It's the kind of experience that makes you realize how quickly a normal night can turn into something out of a nightmare. The second story comes from a guy named Marcus, who worked the night shift at a hospital downtown. He relied on the subway to get home, usually catching the last train of the night. Most nights the train was filled with other late shift workers, a few drunks, and the occasional couple heading home from a night out. But one night, Marcus found himself alone in a car, except for a woman sitting at the far end. She was dressed in a long, old-fashioned coat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't move, didn't look up, just sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Marcus tried not to stare, but something about her made him uneasy. The train rattled through the tunnels, stopping at empty stations. At one point, the lights flickered, and for a split second, Marcus thought he saw someone else standing behind the woman. A tall, shadowy figure, just out of the reach of the overhead lights. He blinked and the figure was gone. The woman hadn't moved. As the train approached Marcus's stop, he stood up and moved toward the door. The woman finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes seemed too large for her face. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. Marcus stepped off the train, heart pounding, and watched as the doors closed. The woman continued to stare at him through the window, her smile never fading, until the train disappeared into the darkness. Marcus told himself it was just his imagination, that he was tired and seeing things. But when he got home, he found a note slipped under his apartment door. It was a single piece of paper, folded in half. Inside, in neat, old-fashioned handwriting, were the words, "I saw you on the train." Marcus never took the subway alone at night again. The third story is from a woman named Priya, who was traveling home on a crowded city bus after a long day at work. She was standing near the back, holding onto the overhead rail, when she noticed a man staring at her from across the aisle. He was unremarkable, mid-30s, average build, wearing a faded jacket. But his eyes never left her, not even when people moved between them or blocked his view. Priya tried to ignore him, focusing on her phone, but every time she glanced up, he was still watching. At the next stop, the bus emptied out a bit and the man moved closer, taking a seat directly in front of her. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Priya frowned, unsure if he was talking to her. "Excuse me?" she asked. The man didn't respond, just stared at her with wide, unblinking eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, louder this time. Priya felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. The bus continued on, and the man grew more agitated, rocking back and forth in his seat. "They're coming," he muttered over and over. Priya tried to move away, but the bus was too crowded. Suddenly, the man stood up and started shouting, "Get off the bus! Get off the bus now!" The driver pulled over and people began to panic, pushing toward the doors. Priya managed to squeeze past the man and get off the bus, her heart racing. As she looked back, she saw the man standing in the doorway, staring at her with a look of pure terror. Priya never found out what the man meant or why he was so afraid. But for weeks after, she avoided that bus route, always wondering if she'd run into him again. The fourth story comes from a guy named Ethan, who had just moved to a new city for his first real job. He didn't know anyone yet, and the subway was his only way to get around. It was late autumn, the kind of night where the cold seeps into your bones and the city feels emptier than usual. Ethan was heading home after a long day, earbuds in, scrolling through his phone as the train rattled along the tracks. The car was nearly empty, just him, a woman in a business suit reading a paperback, and a man slumped in the corner, face hidden by a hood. Ethan barely noticed the man at first. He was used to seeing all kinds of people on the subway, and most kept to themselves. But as the train sped through the underground, Ethan started to feel uneasy. Every time he glanced up, he caught the man's reflection in the window. Just a shadowy figure, unmoving, but somehow always facing him. The woman got off at the next stop, leaving Ethan alone with the hooded man. The train doors closed, and the car was suddenly silent except for the hum of the tracks. Ethan tried to focus on his phone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He looked up again, and this time the man was staring directly at him. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The man's face was still mostly hidden, but his eyes were visible, wide, unblinking, and fixed on Ethan. The train entered a tunnel, and the lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the car. Ethan looked away, pretending not to notice, but he could feel the man's gaze burning into him. At the next stop, Ethan stood up, ready to get off even though it wasn't his station. As he moved toward the door, the man stood up too, mirroring his movements. Ethan's pulse quickened. The doors slid open and Ethan stepped onto the platform, glancing over his shoulder. The man followed, keeping a few paces behind. The platform was deserted, the only sound the echo of their footsteps. Ethan walked quickly, trying to put distance between them, but the man kept pace. He turned down a corridor, hoping to lose him, but the man was still there. Ethan broke into a jog, heart pounding, and ducked into a stairwell. He pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath, listening for footsteps. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the man appeared at the top of the stairs, staring down at Ethan. Without thinking, Ethan bolted up the stairs, pushing past the man and sprinting toward the exit. He burst out onto the street, gasping for air, and looked back. The man was gone. Ethan never saw him again, but for months afterward, he avoided that subway line, always glancing over his shoulder, wondering if the man was still out there, waiting. These stories aren't just about fear. They're about the way public spaces can turn on you in an instant. One moment, you're just another commuter, lost in your own world. The next, you're the main character in a story you never wanted to be part of. It's the unpredictability that gets under your skin. The knowledge that anyone, at any time, could become a threat. But what makes these stories even more unsettling is how ordinary they start. Jamie was just heading home from the library. Marcus was riding the subway after a long shift. Priya was standing on a crowded bus, and Ethan was scrolling through his phone. There's nothing special about these moments, until suddenly there is. It's the contrast between the mundane and the terrifying that makes these experiences so hard to shake. And it's not just about the people you encounter. Sometimes it's the places themselves that feel wrong. The empty train car, the deserted platform, the flickering lights in a tunnel. These are spaces we move through every day. But when something feels off, it's impossible to ignore. Your senses go on high alert, every sound and shadow magnified. You start to question your own instincts. Am I overreacting, or is something really wrong? For Jamie, it was the man who followed her off the bus, turning a quiet street into a gauntlet. For Marcus, it was the woman with the unsettling smile and the note slipped under his door. For Priya, it was the stranger's warning and the panic that spread through the bus. For Ethan, it was the hooded man who seemed to materialize out of the shadows, turning a routine commute into a chase. What ties these stories together isn't just fear. It's the sense of vulnerability that comes with being alone in a public space. On public transport, you're surrounded by strangers, but you're also isolated. There's a kind of unspoken agreement. We don't talk, we don't make eye contact, we pretend not to notice each other. But when that agreement is broken, when someone crosses the line, it's jarring. Suddenly, you're not just a passenger, you're a target. And yet, there's something almost universal about these experiences. Ask around, and you'll find that almost everyone has a story. A time when a stranger's behavior made them uneasy, or when a routine trip took a dark turn. Maybe it was a man who stared too long, or someone who followed you off the train. Maybe it was a feeling you couldn't explain, a sense that something was wrong, even if you couldn't put your finger on it. These moments stick with us, long after the fear has faded. They change the way we move through the world, making us more cautious, more aware. We start to notice the people around us, to pay attention to exits and escape routes. We learn to trust our instincts even when they don't make sense. But there's another side to these stories too, a kind of resilience that comes from surviving something scary. Jamie changed her routine, but she didn't stop living her life. Marcus found a new way home, but he didn't let fear control him. Priya avoided that bus route, but she kept moving forward. Ethan stayed alert, but he didn't let one encounter define his experience in a new city. In the end, these stories are a reminder that fear is a part of life, especially in a world where we're constantly surrounded by strangers. But they're also a testament to the strength it takes to keep going, even when the world feels dangerous. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens in the moment, it's what comes after. The way your mind replays every detail, searching for clues you might have missed. The way you start to question your own judgment, wondering if you overreacted or if you should have done something differently. For the people in these stories, the fear didn't end when they got home. It lingered, settling into the corners of their lives like a shadow that refuses to leave. Jamie, for example, found herself jumping at every unexpected sound for weeks after that night. She started double-checking the locks on her doors and windows, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Even in broad daylight, she felt exposed, as if the man from the bus could appear at any moment. She tried to talk about it with friends, but most of them just shrugged it off. "You're probably just being paranoid," they said. But Jamie knew what she felt. She knew how real the fear was. Marcus, too, struggled to move on. The note he found under his door haunted him. He kept it hidden in a drawer, unable to throw it away but too afraid to look at it. Every time he rode the subway, he scanned the faces of the other passengers, searching for the woman with the unsettling smile. He never saw her again, but the memory of her eyes, wide, unblinking, and somehow knowing, stayed with him. He started taking cabs when he could afford it, even if it meant spending money he didn't really have. The subway, once just a part of his routine, had become a place of anxiety. Priya's experience changed the way she interacted with strangers. She became hyper-aware of the people around her, always watching for signs of danger. She started carrying pepper spray in her bag, and she mapped out alternate routes home in case she ever needed to escape. The man's warning, "You shouldn't be here," echoed in her mind, making her question every decision. Was he trying to protect her? Or was he part of something more sinister? She would never know, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself replaying the chase on the subway platform over and over. He wondered what would have happened if he hadn't run, if he had confronted the hooded man or tried to lose him in a different way. He started avoiding eye contact with strangers, keeping his head down and his guard up. The city, which had once felt full of possibility, now seemed full of threats. But as time passed, each of them found ways to cope. Jamie started taking self-defense classes, channeling her fear into something empowering. Marcus reached out to a therapist, talking through his anxiety and learning strategies to manage it. Priya joined an online community for women who had experienced harassment, finding comfort in the stories of others who understood what she was going through. Ethan made friends in his new city, building a support system that helped him feel less alone. These stories aren't just about fear, they're about survival. They're about the ways we adapt to a world that can be unpredictable and dangerous. They're about the small acts of courage it takes to keep moving forward, even when you're scared. And they're about the importance of listening to your instincts, even when others try to dismiss your concerns. It's easy to think that these things only happen to other people, that you'd know what to do if you were ever in a similar situation. But the truth is, fear has a way of catching you off guard. It sneaks up on you in the moments when you least expect it. On a quiet bus ride, in an empty subway car, on a crowded train platform. And when it does, you have to make split-second decisions that can change everything. Sometimes those decisions are the difference between safety and danger. Jamie's decision to run, Marcus's choice to leave the subway, Priya's instinct to get off the bus, Ethan's sprint up the stairs. These were all acts of self-preservation, driven by a gut feeling that something wasn't right. And while it's easy to second-guess those choices after the fact, the reality is that listening to your instincts can save your life. But there's another layer to these stories, one that's harder to talk about. It's the way fear can isolate you, making you feel like you're the only one who's ever been through something like this. It's the way people dismiss your experiences, telling you to just get over it or stop being so dramatic. It's the way society teaches us to downplay our fears, to keep quiet and carry on as if nothing happened. That's why it's so important to share these stories, to break the silence and let others know they're not alone. When you hear about someone else's experience, it validates your own. It reminds you that your fear is real, that your instincts are worth trusting, and that it's okay to take steps to protect yourself. And sometimes, sharing your story can help others avoid similar situations. Maybe someone hears Jamie's story and decides to change their route home. Maybe Marcus's experience makes someone more cautious on the subway. Maybe Priya's warning encourages someone to trust their gut, even when it doesn't make sense. Maybe Ethan's chase reminds someone to stay alert, to never assume that public spaces are always safe. Of course, not every encounter on public transport is dangerous. Most of the time, it's just a way to get from point A to point B, surrounded by people who are just as tired and distracted as you are. But every once in a while, something happens that reminds you how vulnerable you really are. And when it does, it leaves a mark, a story you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. So the next time you step onto a bus or a train, take a moment to look around. Notice the people, the exits, the little details that might seem unimportant. Trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to act if something feels off. Because sometimes the creepiest things happen when you least expect them, and the only thing standing between you and danger is your own awareness. If there's one thing these stories prove, it's that the world is full of unknowns. Public transport is a crossroads, a place where lives intersect for a few fleeting moments, where you can be surrounded by dozens of people and still feel completely alone. It's easy to forget, in the routine of daily life, that every stranger has a story, every empty seat holds a possibility, and every journey can take an unexpected turn. But maybe that's why these stories stick with us. They remind us that we're all vulnerable, no matter how tough or experienced we think we are. They remind us that fear isn't just something to be ashamed of. It's a signal, a warning, a part of being human. And they remind us that, even in the scariest moments, we have the power to act, to protect ourselves, and to survive. For Jamie, Marcus, Priya, and Ethan, the fear they felt was real. The choices they made were instinctive, shaped by a lifetime of learning to read the world around them. And while their stories might sound like something out of a movie, they're a reality for countless people every day. Maybe you've had a similar experience, a time when a stranger's stare made your skin crawl, or when a routine commute turned into something you'll never forget. If you have, know that you're not alone. There's strength in sharing these stories, in acknowledging the fear and the courage it takes to keep moving forward. And if you haven't, let these stories be a reminder. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of a gut feeling. Because in the end, it's not just about the creepiest things that happen on public transport. It's about the way we navigate a world that can be unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. It's about the choices we make, the lessons we learn, and the stories we carry with us. Stories that shape who we are and how we see the world. So the next time you find yourself on a late-night bus or an empty train car, remember these stories. Remember that fear can be a friend, that courage can be quiet, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become the ones you'll never forget.